Welcome CSC230 to ex7 Jumbotron. The term Jumbotron comes from a Bootstrap template. We're not going to use Bootstrap, but we are going to use the template and the layout that they use in the Jumbotron. Jumbotron actually comes from this area in here, the banner area. We'll just call it banner area, but we'll call it the exercise Jumbotron because that's a neat name for an exercise. It'll make sense. And we're going to work on this in a number of steps, but I wanted to take some time and show you the finished product first, at least what we're going to be working towards. It may not look exactly like this, but this is what we're going to work towards. And I just want to go over the structure and the HTML first before we get into all the details. Now for this layout here, there's basically 4 sections. Now I don't want to use the term section because we do have an HTML element called section, so I'll call them elements. We're going to have a nav element up here in the top. Then we're going to have a header element, which is in here, which is kind of the banner area, and then we're going to have a section element, which is going to be the main section in here that has the 3 columns, and then a footer. So again, nav, header, section, footer. Those are our 4 main parts of this page. And then inside those parts, we're going to use a container class that's going to be inside there. And the container class is going to have some properties that basically hold it together. They're going to give us this 80% width. So the layout of our page right now, of all the content inside, is about 80% of the window. So as we resize this and move it in, it stays 80% of the window. All that content, you can see the margins here and here are still 80% of the window. So we're going to make containers, and they're all going to share the same container class so that it can be used multiple times. That's the idea with a class. We could use those properties multiple times to multiple sections, whereas IDs are meant to be used one time only, but classes can be reused. So we're going to use a container class that's going to hold everything in. It's also going to center everything as well, so it'll have that margin auto property to it, and it'll have an 80% width to it, and then we'll even make an additional class that'll have flex so that we could do the columns down here. We're going to try out flex down here, CSS Flexbox, and up here we may use flex, we may just use floats for this. I think in the past I had used floats for everything, but we're going to try some new things with this as we go. This will be a little bit different than we did in the past. So I just wanted to break it down a little bit so you can see what's inside here. Now again, inside the nav and inside the container, what we're going to have is an H1, or this could be an image, but we'll start off just with an H1, a heading, and that's just going to be company name. Over here will be a nav menu, so we'll have a class called nav menu, but what will be inside there will be basically an unordered list that's set up as inline blocks. So it's a bullet list, and we take the bullets away, and we're going to use these as navigation. So that's going to be set up as navigation. So there's 2 parts that are in this nav area up at the top. Then this area, the header area, we may call it banner. I think that's the class name we'll call it instead of Jumbotron, but we'll call it banner. It basically has an H1, a paragraph, and a button. Pretty simple. And notice the button has this little transition effect that we could do. It's really easy, where you can kind of hover over it and it takes a little amount of time before it changes, other than just changing instantly. So that's a transition for CSS we could use. They're also used down here. Now in this section here, it's called section. We could call it main, we could call it columns, whatever. We basically have 3 areas or 3 columns. Now eventually they could be stacked on each other, but right now they're side by side, and they basically have an H1, a paragraph, and a button. That's it. So similar to what we did in our previous exercises when we started to dig into floats and started to dig into Flexbox a little bit. And then the footer just has a background color, and it just has a paragraph, and it just has 1 line, and that's all that's going to be down here. Sometimes you might have additional links. At the bottom, you'll see not just copyrights, but links all over the page. But this is kind of our template to start. It's kind of a starting point for a bigger site. So we're going to build off of this. So we're not linking to other pages yet, but we will. And then as we dig into this, we'll add more things. We'll add background images, we'll add transitions and buttons and things like that. And then also responsiveness we'll add, so that when we resize this, not only will it stay 80%, but when it gets to a certain point, here it changes to 2 columns instead of 3. I'm not sure if we'll do that or not. We might just go right to the stacked columns, but this has an in-between query, this version. And as we keep going over, eventually it'll become single column where they're stacked on top of each other. So instead of 3 columns, this will be the responsive the way it would appear on a phone. And also one thing up here to point out is that instead of having our nav menu up here, because there really wouldn't be enough space for it, I mean, we could stack it on top of each other, but what we have is this hamburger menu, which is kind of 3 lines that sort of look like a image of a hamburger. And if you click on this, it opens up a drop-down menu that has the same navigation. Now we could style this any way we want, but right now it's just stacked going down, and it takes up the width of our window, and it'll keep getting smaller as we go down. But anyway, here's our navigation here. So it just presents a different place for our navigation, and everything else gets kind of resized for the page. So that's what we're going to work towards. This requires a little bit of JavaScript, so we're going to leave that stuff till last, but we're going to get our structure set up first. So that's what we're going to be working towards, and this will be a number of steps. But in here, this is kind of the first part. So this is what we're going to work towards in the first part, is just getting our HTML structure set up. So this is basically our nav up at the top, this is our header, this is our section, and this is our footer. Now this is without all the coloring and all the CSS that's making it look nice. Now there is CSS in here for the layout. We're going to work from the layout first and then work on all the styling to make it look nice. But this will be our first part to get it like this. And actually, this is responsive. I think I also have a query in here so far. So this is actually responsive. It just has no color or images or anything really nice yet. There's no hovering, no buttons are active yet or anything. These are a little active, I guess. They must have some kind of hover in there, but that's what we're going to work on first. So this will be the first part of it, just getting to this point. And since we're using image shortcuts, it shouldn't take that long to get our content in there. But we just want to make sure that we have everything broken down nice, since there are a lot of parent-child relationships of, nav and then elements inside of that and elements inside of that. So we have a lot of multiple parent-child relationships that we'll have to work on, and we just want to make sure we get that straight and we understand what's happening, because the naming can get confusing on what's going inside of what and how we name it. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can attack this from any direction, and I'm going to try to guide you and be as efficient as possible when we do this. So that's going to be the first part. So what I'm going to do next, this is kind of our intro. This is part one. In part two, we're going to get into actually creating our folder in Replit and making our index page and making our CSS page and getting started. So let's get started with ex7 Jumbotron layout.